Well, g'day. I'm back on the bike today and I've sorted out a few problems with this carburetor. When I took this cover off to look at the throttle, the the idle adjuster is right back, which is where it should be, but the butterfly was held open about that much because the throttle cable adjustment up on the handlebar had moved, and I hadn't picked that up when I fitted the carburetor, so that much movement in the butterfly would have made it rev high, which it was doing on that false start. But now I've adjusted that back. I need to tighten up the lock nut there, and so that it hits the stop each time. So winding back the idle adjustment had no effect when the engine was over revving on that test start, because the throttle was held open by the adjustment in the cable. So that's just one thing. Well, I'm back on the study desk with a ice cream bucket with a carburetor in it and the tools I think I need to investigate the problems. I've found one already with the throttle cable holding the butterfly open away from the idle adjuster, so that's why winding the idle adjuster out when the engine was revving too fast on the test start had no effect, and it was allowing enough air through for it to rev probably at over 2,000 revs would be my guess during that test start, and no way of slowing it down. So that's one fault, and it's assembly fault. I think I had visitors arrive the moment I slotted that little throttle cable retainer into place, and then left it to talk to them, and didn't realise that I would have normally noticed that the throttle stop wasn't right, but I would have just whacked the cover on, and when I next came back to it, assumed it was right, but it wasn't. So there's one thing. Somebody requested a picture of what tools I'm using at different stages of this project. I'll just go through. This is a larger flat blade screwdriver for taking out the main jet. The pliers are used for undoing the choke, and also it will help me get the float hinge pin out. This is just a general size Phillips head for undoing the screws on the side of the carburetor. That is a flat blade for the smaller jets. This is a picking tool for getting down, poking around, and that's the carby kit I purchased with the old needle and seat in there and the old O-ring seal. All the rest of the parts are new. That's a cheap Chinese kit that came in the post. LT F250 97.99. Well, as far as I can tell, that's the same as one that suits sort of 1990 through to 99. I can't be 100% sure, but I think that's the case. So that's what I'm starting with. I'm going to now start knocking the carburetor apart again. I was going to check the float valve as the first thing. So this is the jet that the needle on the plunger engages with. It pushes out towards the centre of the carburetor rather than out where the main jet bolts on one end. Now it's got a series of holes on along it. There's one there, And I've got this set of modeller's drills. There's two there, one there, one there. Now those holes go right through. There's one at right angles there, and that's where they come through the other side. So there's effectively 3 holes drilled right through this tube. I think they call this the emulsion tube, and it's set, this end of it here is keyed so it lines up in a particular way in the carburetor, and those holes in there, this drill that I've got in my hand is 0.65 millimeters, and if I was in the right position, that drill goes into those holes. That's the largest drill in my kit that fits in those holes. Now, I didn't get this tube out when I dismantled the carburetor in the last video, and as it turns out, these holes were clear, so there's not really a problem with this emulsion tube. Where there was a problem, and is this location in here, where there is a hole that goes through there, and that goes right through, and you can see down the end of this there, that's it, that's the end of that drill poking in and out where that emulsion, there it is there, where that emulsion tube goes. Now that gallery through there was definitely blocked on this carburetor, and yeah, look, I did a bit of research, reread the carburetor repair and maintenance part of the manual, and it indicated that there should be a gallery through there that's clear. I had looked at that when I had this carburetor apart last time and tried to stick a fine piece of wire up that hole, and it didn't go through, and I didn't think too much more about it. But now it's taken this fine drill that I've mounted up here to fire its way through there. It took a bit of actual twist drilling to get it to go through, just as it's taking a little bit of twisting to come out now. Yeah, so there's still something that it's rubbing against in there, but I've got it obviously opened up, and so there's another problem, which, if you like, potentially is the third problem that I'm having with this carburetor since I looked at it in the last video. That was blocked. The throttle wasn't closing off, so the idle was too high, and thirdly, the needle and seat here that I've removed at the moment wasn't shutting the fuel off, and I'm still a little bit puzzled as to why it's not working. I've had that needle and seat out since, and I've blown through it, and for all intensive purposes it is working now. When I first blew through it, I dislodged a piece of crap or something that was holding it open, but I've given the carburetor a little bit of an ultrasonic clean. I don't know whether it looks any cleaner here in the photos, but soap and water this time, and then a dry in the sun. So I'm going to put it back together again, hopefully. My theory is the throttle stop, this being held open by the actual throttle cable, not the idle adjuster, was making the engine rev, and I couldn't reduce the revs. So that's that. I think there was loads of fuel going through it because I kept being able to pour more and more fuel down the fuel line, and it had to be running into the engine because there's nowhere else for it to go. And it's just that the engine was running with the throttle open, that it was burning enough of it to keep the engine running. I think so much had run into the engine that it initially, before I started the engine, that it actually hydraulically locked the piston with fuel in the cylinder. The fuel's incompressible, and the starter motor had trouble turning the engine over. It only moved it like half a turn until that petrol that was in the cylinder compressed, or tried to compress it, and then it probably squirted it past the rings, and then eventually did turn over, but then the motor didn't start. When I put the camera down and continued to try and start it, and I opened up full throttle, it did start, and then it ran at high speed, and I think it was getting plenty of fuel, and it was getting enough air from the butterfly being held open to run like that. So look, putting these things back together, I'm not sure what the ultimate effect of this little passageway in the bottom here has on the carburetor and how the engine performs, but I am sure that gallery should be open, and I've now got it open. I think when it is open, it aligns with one of the tiny holes in that emulsion tube, and I've now checked it, taken it out and checked it. So I've got all the jets out of this at the moment. I couldn't see any issue with any of the others. I was concerned. I was guessing that maybe the pilot fuel screw was part of the problem, but I'm now thinking maybe not. So I think I just need to give it another go with these things sorted out, and we'll see what happens. This is just another shot of where that hole is, and yeah, so that is a 0.65 millimeter drill in a jeweler's screwdriver holder that I'm poking down through that hole, and it was definitely blocked. I suspect, the old fuel sort of forms a bit of a varnish on the surfaces, and that's what it sort of, it wasn't like there's a piece of metal or anything in there. I think it just needed to be reamed out, and this model screwdriver did that. So I just thought I'd give you another shot of where to look for that hole. There's another one of that same drill going through those holes on that emulsion tube. This is the one set of holes that are at right angles to the other two that you can see there. A 0.65 drill goes through there, a 0.7 does not, so that gives you an idea of the size and the orientation. These two holes are near the top or the main jet end of the emulsion tube, whereas the hole that is through this bottom here, is near the other end of the emulsion tube, and may not in fact line up with one of these miniature holes, because I think there is no holes in the tube down near the end that the vacuum needle enters from. So the gallery must go through to this space created by the narrowed down section of this emulsion tube. So anyway, I'll leave it there. Now, an effort to be a whole lot more thorough this time assembling this carburetor, I've doing things a little bit differently. I've got a selection of different size heat shrink tubing, which I'm using to blow through to check that I'm getting airflow through each of the jets and the different galleries on the carburetor. I'm also using this larger piece here to blow through the fuel line, and the air should pass through the needle and seat in that position and then be blocking off at about that position, and then this float can move in even further. And that's just, it's up against the little sprung-loaded pin on the top of the needle and seat when it's about there, and that starts to, the actual seat should be closed at that point and no airflow. And then if the fuel rises higher, it's only pressing that needle and seat tighter closed. Well, I'm finding now with the airflow, if I'm blowing in this tube, is starting to shut off at that point, and nothing gets through if it goes beyond that point, and it opens up again. And this is the fuel. My finger, imagine my finger being the fuel in the float bowl. It should allow fuel in from the petrol tank or the fuel pump if the float's down like that, and it should shut it off when it gets to about this point. That's the standard float height, and then have it completely blocked off if the level tries to rise any higher than that. And then as it uses the fuel up in the float, it lets more in. So now, from what I can tell, that is currently working correctly, and I'm happy to assemble it like that. I don't know why so much fuel was being flowed through the carburetor when I did my test before. I will perhaps try some actual fuel before I fit the carburetor up to the bike and see, have a fuel gravity feed in this line, just to see that float is shutting it off and it's not spilling out into the carburetor itself. But that's best I can work out at this stage. Well, at the risk of looking ridiculous, I've got the carburetor here with a little bit of heat shrink on the fuel line, and because it's got no fuel in it at the moment and it's sitting upright like that, I should be able to blow into that pipe and hear my air going into the carburetor. Let me do that. Which it's doing. So it's letting the air in. Now when I turn the carburetor upside down, the weight of the float should shut the fuel line off, and I will blow into the tube again, and I should not be able to pass air into the float chamber. So I can't do that. Now, if you notice, I'll tip the carburetor over while I'm trying to blow, and you may see when it does release. and then so it released and then it blocked again when I tipped it completely upside down. So the needle valve there is sealing, and I will continue on. I've tried to mock this carburetor up so that it's in roughly the same plane. You can see the plane where the float chamber meets the bottom of the body of the carburetor is pretty horizontal. I'm holding that camera showing behind may indicate it's close enough to horizontal, that flange, and I think I've got it fairly horizontal across in the other plane. So I've got this fuel line connected still to this little funnel at the top there, and I'm going to put some fuel in that funnel, and the float level in the carburetor will shut off supply. Let's stop there. The level in this bottle is maybe 20 millimeters below the writing there at the moment. So adding more fuel. It's filling up the hose, which wouldn't take much, and it should be filling up the carburetor bowl. And there's the level coming up in the funnel there now. I'll stop there and we'll have a look over here. So there's no drips obvious underneath the carburetor there at the moment. The level in there is fairly steady at the moment. From what I can tell, there's no fuel laying in the bottom of the carburetor at that point. Can't quite tell from this direction, but if any comes through, look, this level in the funnel is maintained. So my feeling is that that needle and seat is now working, and it's used maybe 25 millimeters of the level in this bottle, which probably would equate to the float plus the tube and the funnel volume. So I don't think I'm losing any fuel there. So I'm going to go ahead and fit that carburetor again. Okay, I'm ready to give this a second start, and ignition on, green light, kill switch on, chokes on. Now I'm going to try and push the starter with one knuckle. I've released the choke a little bit. It's sounding a whole lot nicer. And I forgot to block this petrol pump up, so I'll do that now. But that was otherwise a pretty good start. Kill switch, turn the kill on again, just the start button. That's a bit better as the second start. I'm pretty happy with that. Just the kill switch, and off. Well, after a second attempt, I think I've fixed the start and run problems. Get out to your shed and have some fun.